Hey guys, and welcome. After completing Halo Infinite's campaign, there's still a lot of unanswered questions that I have, and of course probably you guys have as well, about the different events and mysteries hidden within Zeta Halo. The main one for me, of course, being the Endless, the Harbinger, and Xalanyn. What are they, where do they come from, and what does this mean for the future of Halo? Now, in my legendary ending video, by the way, links are in the description down below if you haven't seen it already, there are a lot of comments around what the Harbinger, the Endless, and Xalanyn could be, and I have some really cool theories about this. I want to start off this video by diving into a little bit of Halo lore to bring everyone up to speed exactly with, of course, what these factions are, and a little bit of previous Halo lore which could directly link to this. And then, of course, the final verdict and theory on what I believe these factions are, and why the Endless are such a terrifying faction in general. And in the game's dialogue, it mentions that they're worse than the Flood, so yeah, pretty scary times. Please make sure you guys go check in the description down below, of course, for the timestamps in the video to, again, skip to whichever part that you want to, but from my perspective, I would really suggest to watch the entire thing through, because of course, each section in this video will give you the knowledge to build up your own theories about it, and each section is really important to the story I'm trying to tell here. But again, if you already know the knowledge for different parts of this video, go ahead and skip to whichever part you want to. And of course, I'm not saying that we have, but I think we may have cracked what the Endless are. It's super interesting. I'm not going to give anything away, but of course I want you guys to listen out and give me your theories down below. But man, it's mad. It's actually mental. But anyway, let's get straight into the video. First of all, I want to provide a bit of lore around the Precursors, because it's really important to understand what happened to them and how the Flood and the Primordial formed and became what they are. Again, guys, as I mentioned, if you already know the story about the Primordial, the Precursors, and the Flood, then of course feel free to skip this part, but again, if you don't, this is really imperative to understand what's going on for the story. The Precursors were an advanced race that preceded and were mythologized by the Forerunners. The Forerunners classified them as transcendent beings, having the ability to travel amongst galaxies and accelerate the evolution of intelligent life. The Precursors were responsible for seeding the Milky Way with life, creating the galaxy's diverse compositions and species to become new tools and companions, and engineered millions of solar systems. Over time, they would also judge whether a species was worthy of the mantle, their assumed role of guardianship of all life. The humanoid species native to the world of Jabaub, who would come to be known as the Forerunners. Originally created by the Precursors to serve as their assistants and adjustants, the Forerunners were eventually judged to be unworthy of taking on the mantle and were planned to be wiped out. And the Precursors instead decided that the responsibility would fall on the shoulders of another of their creations, a collection of species referred to as humanity. During the Forerunners expedition on Path Ketona, where they encountered their creators, Forerunners accidentally found out about this genocidal plan around 10 million BCE. The Forerunners decided to prevent such fate and furiously retaliated against their creators and drove them to near extinction, first in the Milky Way and eventually in the satellite galaxy of Path Ketona. Only a small number managed to escape the Forerunners' campaign of extermination. According to the Precursors themselves, the Forerunners struck against their creators unprovoked, while certain Forerunners who learned the truth later on insisted that Precursors had planned to wipe the Forerunners first. A few of the Precursors escaped or were spared by the Forerunners. They either went into suspended animation or became molecular dust that was meant to eventually regenerate into their past forms. However, over millions of years, the dust became defective, failing to reconstitute the Precursors and instead including madness and mutations in life forms that came in contact with it. This form would later be known as the Flood. Far from accepting failure and extinction, the Precursors viewed the Flood as the means to bring unity to the galaxy, as well as punish the Forerunners for their insolence. Vowing that none of their creators would rise against them again, the Precursors decided that all life would be deprived of free will and merged into one. In the end, the sum of the Precursors' creation would be a reflection on themselves and the suffering their creations caused them. However, not all Precursors chose to take course in this action. After the genocide, those Forerunners who refused to take part in the genocide of their creators were exiled to a planet in Path Ketona. While there, they discovered two Precursor survivors who were not as corrupt as the Primordial, but were instead of a more gentle and kind nature. The Forerunners tried to save them, but the survivors chose to die with the rest of their species. Approximately 10 million years later, after the Forerunners' genocide of the Precursors, humanity's interstellar empire came into contact with the Precursors' powder, which would, over several centuries, bring forth the Flood. The Flood initially ravaged humanity's colonies, until receding from the galaxy on its own accord, awaiting for a better moment to exact their final vengeance on the Forerunners. The Flood intentionally allowed some humans to go uninfected, leaving the implication of a possible cure that would misdirect efforts into its next assault. Around the same time, a human exploratory group discovered a small planetoid at the edge of the Milky Way, hidden within its large stasis capsule containing an ancient being who they later named the Primordial. In fact, the last intact precursor mutated to survive the passage of eons. The group transported the capsule and of course its captive to the human capital world of Sharam Hakor, and found a way to communicate with the being, which claimed to be the last precursor. The human scientists began questioning the Primordial, almost interrogating it. And when the human scientists questioned the imprisoned being as to the nature of the Flood, the Primordial's responses were so horrifying that many of them committed suicide. Around 10,000 years later, the Isodidact interrogated the Primordial on Installation 07, receiving only vague responses as to the fate of the precursors and the relationship with the Flood. Of course, enraged by this, the Isodidact then executed the being. The Primordial faced its end with calm satisfaction, stating that the Forerunners' defiance and, indeed, its own death through the artificial passing of 1 billion years within an accelerating chronological field would only add up to its total sweetness of life's struggles, while asserting its confidence that all life will still succumb to the Flood in the end. The Didacts later discovered that the Gravemind retained the thoughts and the memories of the Primordial. Before its demise, the being had transferred its consciousness into the Flood's compound mind. However, not even the Gravemind could successfully access or comprehend the wisdom the precursors once had, flawed and fallen as it was. So that's a bit of background on the precursors, the Primordial, and of course the Flood as well, and on Zeta Halo. Now, let's talk about some theories. It was mentioned that the Endless had survived the firing of the Halo arrays, which to myself and to a lot of people is extremely difficult to wrap their heads around. The firing of the Halo ring, let alone the entire Halo array at the time, should wipe out all sentient life within its blast radius. How could a species survive this? Well, as we've spoken about in our lore recap, after the Flood Forerunner War, the Isodidact had visited the Primordial and of course began interrogating it in a way, trying to finish what Mendicant Bias had started. However, during this interrogation process, the Primordial would only give very vague responses, not giving away anything to the Isodidact. The Isodidact was enraged by the Primordial's inability to share information, so he made the decision to execute the Primordial. The Primordial was killed by being placed into something called an accelerating chronological field, which is essentially a time lock. No time passes for the occupant, whilst eons may transpire in normal space. Such a field occupies a fractional dimension slip space and protects its contents from all damage inflicted from outside of that field, even from the Halo arrays. Any incoming energy is reflected by the fractional dimension and scattered in the field surroundings as thermal energy and high energy radiation. This was used for the Primordial's body to decompose, however its mind still being intact. It then of course transferred its consciousness into the Flood's compound mind, and of course that was the origin of the Gravemind. In addition to the ability to manipulate time, slipspace bubbles allow the compression of immense masses and volumes into a comparatively tiny space. Now, this is where things get super interesting. Of course, in the description we read earlier on in the video, this part was also mentioned. A human exploratory group discovered a small planetoid at the edge of the Milky Way. Hidden within was a large stasis capsule containing an ancient being who was later named the Primordial, who was in fact the last intact precursor, mutated to survive the passage of eons. Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking right now? Are the Endless the precursors, or is there another planet somewhere on the edge of the Milky Way? Which could there be another or more Primordials out there in these stasis capsules? And it gets even more interesting than this. What does it go on to say at the end of the legendary ending? Offensive bias has been deployed. Now, why would offensive bias be deployed if the Endless are released? Now, if you guys don't know the story of the Mendicant Bias, I'd really recommend going to watch my previous video to get an overview of what happened there. But in high level, Mendicant Bias was deployed to interrogate the first Primordial. Of course, this didn't go to plan, and of course, Mendicant Bias was infected with the Logic Plague. The Forerunners would not want this to happen again if another Primordial was out there, and again, the same thing could happen again. So, this time around, rather than having a smarter AI like Mendicant Bias do the interrogation, why not have a more stable version of Mendicant Bias do the interrogating? offensive bias? I mean, we might have cracked it here. I don't really know. I'd love to know your suggestions down below on this, and potentially it was the Primordial or the Precursors that the Harbinger was speaking to at the end of the game, which is of course why the weapon was unable to establish where this connection was coming from, because it was so old. Okay, I've just thought of something really interesting. This is me editing the video at the moment, and if you guys think back to earlier on into the video when we were talking about the Precursors wanting to essentially perform genocide on the Forerunners because they were an inferior race and they didn't really match up to the mantle. Well, one of my suggestions and one of the things I've just thought about was that maybe the Forerunners know exactly what the Endless are, and potentially they are Precursors. And of course, if they get free, they're of course going to try and eliminate all of those that are an inferior race. So that could be humanity, that could be the Forerunners, and that could be all of the other species in the galaxy. So of course, when the Grand Edict is talking in the legendary trailer, he mentions that they must be contained within Halo and forgotten by time. Is this because if they get out, they're going to try and eliminate or wipe out the Forerunners and of course any other inferior species? And that's the reason why they're worse than the Flood. It's just something that I came to mind, and it makes a lot of sense really. Like the Forerunners, who of course the Grand Edict is a Forerunner, is of course against the Precursors or the Primordial or the Endless in this sense being let out. And not to forget as well, the Harbinger also says the Forerunners' lies are at an end. She is the Harbinger of the truth.
The Forerunners' lies are at an end. I am the Harbinger of the truth. The Endless will be found.
Ooh.
They will ascend.
Now would be good.
I know. 3,
The Reformation begins.
2, 1, go!
Boss fight. Now, could this be because the Precursors thought that, of course, the Forerunners were an inferior race and they needed to eliminate them at the time? Because that's, of course, what their job was, essentially. If they didn't fit the description of the mantle, they were essentially gone. The Forerunners didn't fit that description, and the Forerunners battled against it, defeating the Precursors. This makes a lot of sense, and to be fair, I think this could be around where we are. This might actually make a lot of sense when DLC comes out. Again, this is post-editing, it might not fit into the video very well, but yeah, let me know what you think about it. Also, throughout the boss fight at the end, the weapon mentioned that something was helping her push back against the Harbinger. Could this have been offensive bias? And finally, the portal at the end. The chief and the weapon were teleported 3 days into the future, but to them of course it felt like an instant. All signals and communications were cut off, and even the pilot couldn't detect where they were. Did the weapon and chief enter a fractal dimension slipspace portal to get out of the silent auditorium and back onto the Zeta Halo surface? Again, we don't know who put that portal there, but potentially it could have been offensive bias, putting it to help them get out of there. But again, at this point, we really do not know. Again, there are loads of different theories and discussions that we could have around this, but again, after piecing everything together, it's extremely interesting that how these events really do piece together and just make a lot of sense. And I would love to know what you guys' thoughts and opinions are on what you think the Endless are, who you think they are, and what you think the next part of this story is going to be. Of course, it's definitely going to come to light with more books coming out, the Halo TV series that's coming out very shortly, and also even campaign DLC. But yes, very excited about it all. Guys, if you have enjoyed today's video, it'd be much appreciated if you could drop a like, subscribe, of course, you are brand new, and of course, comment down below your thoughts, opinions on my theories, and of course, what you guys think as well, if you can add to it, or if there's anything I may have missed that you could also add on to the back of as well. It'd be really interesting to take your thoughts and opinions on it too, but for me, maybe there's another Primordial or another Precursor out there that's speaking to the Harbinger. And again, even the key that Atriox was using to open up the containment within Zeta Halo, how was that obtained? Was that from the Harbinger? Again, was that found in a stasis capsule somewhere on Zeta Halo? Again, we don't really know at this point, but there's a lot of theories that people can put together on this. But guys, have a good rest of your day. I won't ramble on for too much longer, but let me know in the comments what you think of this as well. But yeah, have a good rest of your day. See you all soon.